The grave did not look like the hiding place of a national secret. There was no crown, no royal inscription, no carved declaration of who this person had been. Only human remains, buried in early medieval Scotland, belonging to a people history had turned into a riddle: the Picts. For centuries, they were described as strange warriors from the northern edge of the known world. Painted bodies, unreadable symbols, kings whose names survive only in fragments. A people who resisted Rome, built powerful fortresses, and then seemed to vanish just as Scotland itself began to take shape. But when scientists looked inside their DNA, the mystery changed completely. The surprise was not what they found. It was what they failed to find. There was no hidden ancestry from some forgotten nation, no genetic signature of a mysterious invading people, no evidence that the Picts had arrived from some distant corner of Europe before disappearing again into history. Instead, the scientists found something far stranger. The Picts appeared to belong exactly where they were, and that discovery created a far bigger mystery. If the Picts were local people, rooted in the Iron Age populations of Britain, why had generations of historians treated them almost like outsiders? And if their ancestry continued, why did their identity disappear? The first clues came not from the Picts themselves, but from their enemies. Roman writers described the peoples north of the frontier as dangerous, elusive, and impossible to control. To the Roman imagination, the Picts belonged as much to the wilderness as to history. They emerged from forests and hills struck without warning, and vanished into terrain disciplined imperial armies struggled to master. It was an image that endured for centuries, but it was never the whole story, because archaeology began revealing a very different Scotland. Across the north and east of the country, archaeologists uncovered evidence not of scattered tribes, but of organized power. Fortified centers, elite settlements, monumental stone carvings, imported goods, networks of authority stretching far beyond the battlefield. At Tapo Noth, an enormous hill fort dominates the surrounding landscape. For years, sites like this were dismissed as temporary refuges, places where communities fled when danger approached. But the scale of Tapo Noth suggested something far more ambitious. This was not simply a place to hide. It may have been a center capable of gathering thousands of people, organizing labor, storing food, and projecting power across the surrounding landscape. The contradiction was impossible to ignore. The Romans had seen barbarians. The ground was revealing builders. Yet impressive forts could not answer the question that mattered most. Were these remarkable kingdoms built by people who had always lived here? Or by outsiders whose origins had simply been forgotten? Archaeology had reached its limit. Berghead provided another piece of the puzzle. Standing above the Moray Firth, it controlled the sea as much as the land. Its immense fortifications and commanding position point to a center of maritime power, looking outward along routes of trade, diplomacy, and war. Further south at Rhynie, archaeologists uncovered evidence of elite life, imported luxury objects, high-status craft production, and signs of political authority. These were not isolated communities surviving on the edge of the known world. They were participants in a wider network of exchange. The more archaeologists uncovered, the less the Roman picture made sense. Yet one mystery refused to disappear. The Picts left behind almost no writing of their own. Instead, they carved symbols into stone. Animals, crescents, mirrors, combs, abstract designs repeated with unmistakable purpose. Today, around 350 Pictish symbol stones survive. The same symbols appear again and again, carefully arranged, deliberately repeated, clearly intended to communicate something. Names, families, territories, alliances. Each possibility opens a door. None unlocks the system completely. The stones are evidence of a society trying to be remembered, and yet we still cannot read what they wanted to say. Silence has a habit of inviting invention. If a people leave few written records, others begin writing the story for them. Medieval traditions imagined exotic origins. Some traced the Picts to distant peoples, even to the Scythians. Others portrayed them as a mysterious nation that arrived, ruled, and somehow vanished without leaving descendants. Another tradition claimed something equally unusual, that Pictish kingship passed through the female line. The less historians knew, the easier the Picts became to mythologize. But DNA is remarkably difficult to mythologize. When researchers analyzed ancient genomes from individuals associated with the Pictish period, they were not asking whether the Picts painted themselves or what their symbols meant. They were asking a colder question. Who were these people actually related to? The answer dismantled centuries of speculation. The genome showed close affinity with Iron Age populations already living in Britain. Not a mysterious people from the edge of Eurasia, not a forgotten nation that had vanished without trace. Their roots were local. The first great revelation turned the old story upside down. The strangest thing scientists found inside Pictish DNA was not foreignness, it was continuity, but continuity did not mean simplicity. The DNA had answered one question. In doing so, it created another. If the Picts had always been here, how could they disappear? The same genetic study found stronger links with several modern populations, including people in Western Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Northumbria. That does not mean those communities are the Picts. It means they inherited ancestry from the same ancient population landscape. The biology endured, the identities did not. This is where the mystery changes. The question is no longer, where did the Picts come from? It becomes, how can a people disappear from history while their descendants remain? The answer may lie in the difference between biology and identity. A kingdom can vanish without its people vanishing. A language can fade while families continue. A political name can disappear while ancestry passes quietly from one generation to the next. By the 9th century, Pictish power was being drawn into the expanding Gaelic-speaking kingdom of Alba. For generations, this story was told as one people replacing another. Picts here, Scots there, one disappearing as the other emerged. But the evidence now points to something more subtle. Political union does not always mean extermination. It can mean absorption. The Pictish language gradually faded. Gaelic became dominant. Royal authority reorganized itself. The political name Pict slowly disappeared from the historical record. The people did not. DNA cannot tell us everything. It cannot identify every king. It cannot read the symbol stones. It cannot reconstruct every law of inheritance. Even the famous tradition that Pictish kingship passed through the female line remains uncertain. Ancient DNA can reveal ancestry and kinship, but not every political custom. The old tradition may preserve part of the truth, or simply reflect how later generations tried to explain a society they no longer fully understood. The more scientists discover, the less the Picts resemble a vanished civilization. They begin to look like what they probably always were, a living population whose identity changed over time. That is why the symbol stones matter so much. They stand at the boundary between memory and silence. Some belong to an older pre-Christian tradition. Later, stones combine the ancient symbols with Christian crosses. Still later, the crosses remain, while the symbols begin to disappear. The stones preserve a transformation taking place in real time. Not a civilization collapsing overnight, but one slowly becoming something new. This was never a single moment of disappearance. It was centuries of adaptation, centuries of political change, centuries of cultural negotiation. And that explains why the Picts became so mysterious. Most of their story was written by outsiders. Their own language disappeared. Their symbols outlived the people who could read them. Their political name faded from the chronicles. History mistook silence for disappearance. The DNA did not solve every mystery. It did not translate the stones. It did not identify every ruler. It did not tell us exactly how ordinary Picts understood themselves, but it changed the investigation forever. The Picts were not a ghost people who appeared without warning and vanished without trace. They were part of the deep population history of northern Britain. Their kingdoms grew from local foundations. They built great fortresses. They traded across the seas. They resisted one of the greatest empires the ancient world had ever known. They carved their identity into stone, and they helped shape the kingdom that would eventually become Scotland. Only now does the opening mystery finally make sense. The Picts disappeared from the historical record because the historical record was never the same thing as the people themselves. Their political name faded, their language was replaced, their symbols lost their readers, but their ancestry endured. It mixed, it adapted, it survived. The strangest thing scientists found inside Pictish DNA was never evidence of a forgotten race. It was evidence that the lost people had never truly been lost. And that changes more than the history of Scotland. It changes the way we think about the ancient world. Civilizations do not always end in fire. They do not always disappear through conquest. Sometimes they become something else, a new language, a new kingdom, a new identity laid across older lives. The Picts were not erased because they vanished. They became difficult to recognize, and perhaps that is the deeper mystery hidden within ancient DNA. Not how many peoples disappeared, but how many are still here, hidden beneath names we think are new.